The furnace in my parents' basement clicked and groaned all winter, but I never complained about it. I had learned early that complaining cost money, and money in our house was always someone else's fault to spend. I was 7 years old the first time my father sat me down at the kitchen table in Barrie and explained, in the calm voice he reserved for things he considered facts, that my birth had derailed his retirement plan. Not in those exact words. He said it the way adults say things to children they want to wound without leaving a mark, wrapped in numbers, and practicality, in the language of budgets. My mother had needed an emergency C-section. The recovery had taken 3 months. His business, a small HVAC company he'd built with his brother, had suffered. He laid it out like a spreadsheet. Like I owed him something for existing at the wrong time. I filed it away. Kids do that. You file things away, and you get very good at being small. My brother was 4 years older, and my parents' obvious pride. When he got accepted to Western, my father took a week off work to drive him to London and help him move in. When I got into the University of Toronto's computer science program on a partial scholarship, my mother said, "That's far. You'll come home on holidays, right?" I came home on holidays. I worked 2 part-time jobs during the school year and a full-time job every summer. I graduated with honors and a student loan I paid off in 18 months. Nobody drove to Toronto to help me move out. I took the Joe train with 2 duffel bags and a backpack, and I figured it out. The reason I moved back to Barrie at 26 is the thing people always ask about. So let me say it plainly here. My grandmother was dying. My Nana, my mother's mother, had raised me as much as my parents had. She was sharp and funny, and she made pierogies from scratch, and she was the only person in my family who had ever come to one of my school concerts. When her Parkinson's progressed to the point where she couldn't live alone, the family had a meeting. My uncle lived in Calgary. My mother worked full-time. My brother had just had his 2nd kid. Everyone looked at me. I was single. I worked remotely. I was, in the vocabulary of my family, the most available. What that meant was, the most convenient. I moved into my old bedroom. Nana moved into the guest room down the hall. I took her to her appointments. I managed her medications. I learned to make her pierogies because she wanted to teach me, and I knew there weren't many chances left. I paid my parents $300 a month in rent because my father insisted on it, though he never specified what it covered, since I also bought most of the groceries. My company at the time was a Toronto-based cybersecurity firm where I worked as a senior analyst. Remote was fine with them. My salary was good. My savings were better. I had been investing steadily since my 2nd year of work. Nothing flashy, just index funds and a TFSA maxed every January and, eventually, a small stake in a startup that had done very well. Well enough that by 28, my net worth had crossed a number I don't say out loud. Not because I'm embarrassed by it. Because I had learned, from living in my family's house, that information is leverage, and I was not willing to hand mine over. I drove a 2011 Honda Civic with 160,000 kilometers on it. I wore the same Canada Goose jacket I'd bought used off Facebook Marketplace 4 years earlier. I did not correct people when they assumed I was broke. My sister-in-law, Petra, moved into the house 8 months after I did. She and my brother had separated. I never got the full story, and I didn't ask. And suddenly she was in the house with her 2 kids, aged 2 and 4, and my parents were converting the basement rec room into a bedroom for her and gave her the larger of the 2 upstairs bathrooms, which meant she now shared a wall with my room and woke the kids at 6 every morning with a voice that carried. I didn't say anything. Nana needed me close. I stayed. What I didn't realize, for a while, was that I was being repositioned. It started with small things. My mother mentioned that my room got better light, better for the kids to play in. My father said something at dinner about how the basement room was actually quite large, quite functional. A lot of young people would be happy with it. Petra said nothing. She was good at saying nothing. Then one Tuesday evening in March, my father called me into the kitchen after dinner, and my mother was already sitting there, and they told me they needed my room. Not asked. Told. Petra needed the space. The kids needed the space. The basement was finished and comfortable, and I was, they reminded me, just one person. Nana was stable. My presence wasn't as essential as it had been. They said it kindly, the way they said everything, wrapped in practicality, in logic, in the language of fairness that only ever seemed to flow one direction. I said, "When do you need me out?" They said 2 weeks. I said okay, and went upstairs and sat on my bed and looked at the ceiling for a while. Here's what I was thinking. I was thinking about the property listing I had seen 6 weeks earlier for a house 4 blocks away on Dunlop Street. 3 bedrooms, detached, 2-car garage, listed at $620,000. I had a pre-approval from my bank. I had been watching the market for 2 years. I had been waiting for the right time, and I'd been telling myself I was waiting because of Nana, which was true, but I was also waiting because leaving felt like losing. And I am, in a way I don't often admit, very bad at losing. I did not tell my parents any of this. I said okay and went to bed. The next morning, I called my realtor. Moving out was quiet. I had less than I looked like. I had no furniture of my own, just the 2 duffel bags and the backpack again, plus a few boxes of things I'd accumulated. My parents helped me carry the boxes to my car. My father said the basement had its own entrance, very convenient. My mother made me a Tupperware of chicken soup for the drive. Petra watched from the kitchen window. She waved when I reversed out of the driveway. I waved back. The offer on the Dunlop Street house was accepted 11 days later. I did not tell my family. My name on the purchase was through a numbered company I had set up the previous year for tax purposes, 2257819 Ontario Inc., which I sometimes called Ashford Property Group in my own notes, which is not a registered name, just something I wrote to make the spreadsheets less dry. The purchase went through the company. The mortgage was in the company's name. My name appeared nowhere in the publicly accessible records. I hired a property management company to handle the listing. I asked them to be discreet about the owner. They were professionals. They were discreet. I moved into the Dunlop Street house on a Friday. I painted the kitchen on Saturday because the previous owners had chosen a shade of green that made me feel like I was inside a pickle. On Sunday, I drove to my parents' house to visit Nana. My father opened the door. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, which was with a very slight surprise, as if he kept forgetting I existed between visits. He said Petra was using my old room to store some things, but otherwise everything was good. He said the basement was working out fine, right? I said yes. I said it was great. I had a cup of tea with Nana in her room. She was having a clear day, which was a gift. She asked me if I was okay. I said I was, genuinely, more okay than I had been in a while. She patted my hand and said, "You always land on your feet. You got that from me." I laughed. She laughed. I stayed for 2 hours and then drove home to my house on Dunlop Street and sat in the kitchen that was no longer pickle-colored and felt something I can only describe as quiet. The job thing happened in May. My company had been acquired. The new parent company was American, based in Austin, and they were restructuring. My position was being made redundant. They offered a severance package, 4 months' salary, and a glowing letter of recommendation and a handshake. It was not the worst outcome. I had seen the acquisition coming for almost a year. I had already begun freelancing on the side, and I had 2 contracts that, together, paid more than my salary had. I took the severance, said goodbye to my colleagues on a Zoom call, and closed my laptop. That evening, I drove to my parents' house for dinner because I went to my parents' house for dinner every other Thursday. I told them I had left my job. My mother said, "Oh, sweetheart, what happened?" I said the company was restructuring. My father said, "So you're unemployed?" I said I had some contracts, freelance. He nodded in the way that meant he didn't believe me but wasn't going to push it. My mother offered to ask her friend Sandra if the dental office was hiring for admin. I said thank you. I drove home. A week later, I signed a contract with a Vancouver-based financial services company for a cybersecurity consulting retainer that paid more per month than my old salary had. The work was interesting. I set my own hours. I worked from the dining room table in my house on Dunlop Street. I was not struggling. I want to be clear about that. My brother knew someone who knew the owner of the property management company I'd hired. This is how small towns work, even mid-sized ones. Word got around that there was a house on Dunlop Street with an absentee corporate owner, and someone told someone, and my brother mentioned it at a family dinner in June, not to me, to the table in general, that the house on Dunlop was probably a Toronto investor property. Probably some numbered company buying up Barrie real estate. Wasn't it disgusting? Wasn't it exactly the problem with the housing market? I said I didn't know anything about it. I passed the salad. My father started having financial problems in July. I didn't find out until later how bad they were. What I knew at the time was that he was quieter than usual, that the HVAC company, which he still co-owned with his brother though he'd stepped back from day-to-day operations, was having a difficult quarter, that my uncle had apparently made some decisions my father hadn't agreed with, that my mother had mentioned, carefully, that things were a little tight. Then in August, my brother called me. He had that voice, the one he used when he needed something but was going to take a long time getting to it. He asked how I was, how the freelance was going, had I thought about getting a real job again, maybe in the GTA. The market was pretty good right now. I said I was fine. He said, yeah, definitely, but also, had I given any thought to maybe helping out the family a little because Dad was going through some stuff and it would really mean a lot. I asked what kind of help. He said, money. Not a lot. Just to bridge a gap. Maybe 20,000. I said I didn't have 20,000 liquid right now. He said he understood. He said it was just that things were tight and I was the one without kids, without a mortgage. He paused on mortgage and I felt his assumptions sitting there on the line between us, fat and comfortable, and it would just help a lot, you know? I said I'd think about it. I did not lend my family $20,000. What I did instead was look at the publicly filed documents from my father's HVAC company, which are available through the Ontario Business Registry, and I found something interesting. In June, my father had applied for a business loan through a credit union. In the application, he had listed Petra, who had no formal income, as a co-applicant, and had listed her annual income as $80,000. This was not accurate. Petra did not have an income. She was a stay-at-home parent on a separation arrangement that included some child support from my brother, who, I should note, lived in the same house, a fact nobody in the family seemed to find worth discussing. The inaccurate income declaration on a credit application is fraud. It is not a gray area. I took a screenshot of the filing. I saved it. I did not do anything with it yet. September was when things moved quickly. My property management company emailed me to say they had a prospective tenant for the Dunlop Street property. I had decided after living there for 5 months that I wanted to do something different with it. I had found a condo downtown I liked better, newer building, easier maintenance, and I had listed the Dunlop house as a rental while I decided whether to sell. The prospective tenant was my father. He didn't know it was me. He had found the listing through a rental website and contacted the management company. He wanted to rent it for his family. He was planning, apparently, to move, downsize the house he'd owned for 20 years, the house I had grown up in, use the equity to clear the business debt and have some breathing room. He wanted a house with a yard for the grandkids. He wanted something in the north end of Barrie, near his friends, near his church. He wanted Dunlop Street. My property management contact called to confirm I was comfortable proceeding with the application. I asked her to send me his application form. I sat at my dining room table for a long time. I thought about the kitchen table in 1994, where my father had explained to me, in the calm voice, that my birth had been expensive. I thought about the 2 weeks' notice to clear out my room. I thought about the Tupperware of soup, which I think was genuine, which is the thing about my mother. Her kindness and her complicity were always tangled up together, always impossible to separate cleanly. I thought about Nana. I called the management company back. I said to approve the application. I said to schedule a lease signing for the following week. I went to the lease signing. My property management contact had told them the owner would be attending, which was unusual, but not unheard of, and my father and mother walked into the management company's office on Dunlop Street, a different building from the house. Just their boardroom, and they sat down across the table from me, and my father's face did something I had never seen it do. He looked young. Just for a second, then it closed again. My mother said, "What is this?" I slid the lease across the table. The monthly rent was $1,900, which was below market for the neighborhood because I had decided that's what it would be. I said the house had been well maintained. I said I'd had the furnace serviced in September, so they wouldn't have to worry about it this winter. My father said, "You own this house." I said I did. He said, "Since when?" I said since March. He said, "On a freelancer's salary." I said I'd been saving for a while. I said the market had been good to me. I kept it vague, the way I always had, because information is leverage and some habits are hard to break even when you've already won. My mother started crying, not the bad kind or not entirely. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine and said, "You could have told us." And I said gently that I hadn't known if it would work out, that I'd wanted to be sure first, that I was sure now. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The company filing, the income figure." He had done the math. He understood that I had seen it. I said I hadn't filed anything and I wasn't planning to. I said that was his business to sort out, and I trusted him to sort it out, and I needed that to happen before the lease was signed. He said okay. He signed the lease the following Thursday. He corrected the credit application the same week. I moved into the downtown condo in October. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Kempenfelt Bay and a dishwasher that works properly, which feels, after everything, like an almost embarrassing luxury. Nana passed in November. She had a good last week. She was lucid. She was peaceful. She made us all laugh at least once. I was there. I'm glad I was there. At the reception after the funeral, my father found me by the coat rack and stood beside me for a moment without speaking. Then he said, quietly, that he'd underestimated me. He said it like it cost him something. I said thank you. He said, "I'm sorry about the room." I said, "It worked out." He nodded. We stood there for another minute. My mother came over with 2 cups of tea and handed us each one, and the 3 of us stood by the coat rack drinking tea and watching Petra try to keep her youngest from pulling the tablecloth off the dessert table, and my brother jogged over to help her, and for a minute it just looked like a family. I listed the Dunlop Street house for sale in January. I got $41,000 over asking. I did not tell my father until the offer was accepted. He laughed. It surprised me. It was a real laugh, a short one, and he shook his head and he said, "You really are something." And I said, "Yeah, I think I am." And I meant it without any heat. Just as a fact, just as the kind of thing that takes a long time to learn about yourself, but once you know it, you never really forget. The thing about my father's laugh, the real one, the short, surprised one he let out when I told him the offer had been accepted, $41,000 over asking, is that I'd never heard it directed at me before, not like that, not with something that felt close to respect underneath it. I've thought about that laugh a lot since January. I've tried to figure out what it means to finally earn something from a person who decided you were a liability before you were old enough to read. I don't think it means everything is fixed. I don't think a laugh does that, but I think it means something shifted, and I think the shift happened because I refused for a long time to be what they'd decided I was. The most useful thing I ever did for myself was learn to keep quiet about what I had, not out of shame, out of clarity. When you grow up being told you cost too much, you learn that other people's assumptions about you are information. They tell you what they're willing to do, how far they'll push, what they think they can take. My father assumed I was one bad month away from asking him for help. My brother assumed I was the family member without obligations, without assets, without leverage. They acted on those assumptions, and because I'd let them believe what they wanted to believe, I could see exactly what they were made of without them ever adjusting their behavior for my benefit. That's not a game. It's not revenge either, at least not in the way people mean when they use that word. It's just what happens when you pay attention long enough and you trust your own judgment even when nobody around you does. Nana knew. I think she always knew. In the way she knew things without being told. She'd lived long enough to recognize when a person was quietly building something. She never asked me about money. She asked me if I was okay. Those are different questions, and the fact that she understood the difference is probably the reason I turned out the way I did. I keep coming back to the idea that nothing that happened to me in that house was unfair in the way I used to think it was. My father wasn't wrong that my birth cost money. He was wrong about what that meant. Wrong about what a child owes a parent for being born. Wrong about how to carry that kind of resentment. Wrong about what it does to a kid to hear it said plainly at a kitchen table. The cause was real. The conclusion he drew from it was just a choice he made. And every choice like that has somewhere it eventually lands. He landed across a boardroom table from me, signing a lease for a house I'd bought 4 blocks from the one I grew up in. I didn't engineer that outcome. I just didn't stop myself from getting there. I think the only things that actually got me through, the things I tell anyone who grew up feeling like the wrong kind of kid in their own family, are 3 things that sound simple and aren't. The first is that you have to build your judgment quietly and trust it anyway, even when everyone around you is confident you're wrong. That takes a kind of mental discipline that nobody teaches you. You have to practice it the same way you practice anything. Badly at first, then better. The second is that how you handle yourself when things are unfair matters more than how you handle yourself when they're easy. I paid my $300 a month in rent. I drove the Civic. I didn't make scenes. I showed up for Nana. What you do when you're being underestimated is who you actually are. The third is the simplest and the hardest. You have to keep going when nothing external is telling you to. When no one is watching, when no one is cheering, when the furnace is rattling in the basement and your father has just told you the room you grew up in is needed for someone else. You keep going anyway, not because it will definitely work out, because stopping is the only guaranteed way it won't. The condo has floor-to-ceiling windows. On clear mornings, the bay goes flat and silver and the light comes in at an angle that makes the whole room feel like the beginning of something. I make coffee. I sit at the table. I open my laptop. I am, it turns out, exactly what I always suspected I was. It just took everyone else a little longer to catch up.